Are you thinking about buying these Winsor and Newton Cotman watercolors this holiday? In this video, I'll share my thoughts using this watercolor set. At the same time, I will show you how I painted the hollies with their berries under the snow. You won't believe the different results of having a background or just the main subject. So stay with me until the end. Hi, I'm Bianca. First of all, I saw the reference photo on Unsplash. It's a photo by Christina Sammer. You can check the description box for the link to download. Aside from that, I provided a free downloadable outline you can use, or you may draw freehand from the reference photo. It's up to you. I'll start with the colors. By the way, let me just inform you, Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors are student grade. The artist grade of Winsor Newton is with the word professional on the label or on the tube like this. This is a set of 10 colors and it includes cadmium orange hue, cadmium red deep hue, lamp black, ultramarine, dioxazine purple, lemon yellow hue, permanent rose, hooker's green light, burnt sienna, and cerulean blue hue. Before I share my thoughts on the Winsor and Newton Cotman, I'll show you my watercolor painting process of the hollies. I transferred the outline drawing to my watercolor paper block. I use a watercolor block so I can skip the process of taping my paper to an artboard. If you want to see a full tutorial on how I transfer my outline drawing to my watercolor paper as neatly as possible, you can watch this video. Check the description box or tap on the card here at the upper right. Later, I'll show you how I take off the paper from the block. I use Bao Hong Academy Gold Press watercolor block. It's 300 GSM and 100% cotton. This is the best student grade watercolor paper and best for beginners, especially if you are looking for more affordable watercolor paper than the Arch with good quality because it's 100% cotton. I pre-wet the paints before I start painting to activate the watercolors. I started with an underpainting of yellow in some areas and blue for the shadows. I used yellow for those areas of the leaves or stems that show yellow that transition to the green leaves. For the first layer, I use a tea consistency of the lemon yellow hue and ultramarine. Watercolors are transparent. I want to easily show where the shadows are and the yellow to still show even if I add green on top. Remember, in watercolor painting, always paint from light to dark. If you are having a hard time seeing the shadows, I suggest changing the color of the reference photo to black and white and then adjusting the contrast. In this way, you can see where you will need to add the shadows as you look at the reference photo while painting. For the second layer, I mix Hooker's green light with a little ultramarine and dioxazine purple in coffee consistency to paint the hollies. I made a mistake on the first leaf that I painted wet on dry instead of wet on wet. To correct the first leaf, I wet my brush to soften the leaf, especially the edges. I added a bit of water to lighten the color on the light green areas, and when I added the green on top of the ultramarine I painted on the first layer, the color was darker than on the areas I didn't do underpainting. In small areas, I painted wet on dry instead of wet on wet to avoid the watercolor flow to the areas of the painting that do not have much paint needed, like the snow. In painting the hollies, the snow is slowly popping out This is a negative painting. It means that I painted around instead of painting on the subject itself. I was just careful about the parts of the leaves that have pointed tips. As much as possible, I would like to keep the shape. I had only one mixture of green, but as you can see, there were some areas lighter and darker. In some light areas, I dipped my brush into the water and removed the excess before painting the leaves. As I painted these hollies, I consistently look at the reference photo on my left. If you do not know, I used to paint with two brushes at the same time. The smaller brush, size 4, is for painting, and the dump brush, size 7, is for softening the edges or to lighten the color I previously painted with the small brush. If you find this video helpful, kindly tap the like button. If you want to see videos like this, subscribe and make sure you have the bell notification on so you'll be notified if I upload a new video. Honestly, it took me a few hours to paint the leaves. I was careful about going out of the line. I zoomed in and out of the reference photo and carefully painted the edges of the leaves. I didn't cover the edges of the first layer because I wanted to see the yellows. I will add more saturated yellow later. I also dropped some coffee consistency of burnt sienna on some random parts of the leaves, like in the reference photo. I chose this reference photo because I always find the folds of the leaves interesting instead of plain flat leaves. I'm slowly building a community of aspiring watercolor artists, and I will be glad if you sign up for my newsletters to be updated on what I do and what will be upcoming. Check the description box below to see the link to join my mailing list. In painting the berries, I use cadmium red deep in tea consistency. If you look closely, since I painted the shadows on the first layer, it was easy to paint the shadows and the color looks more natural than painting the shadows after 1 to 2 layers of red. The berries are too small for me to paint. For that reason, I avoid watery brush. I always remove the excess water. It's always helpful if you have a towel beside you. In my case, I'm right-handed, so I put the towel on my right side. Always keep in mind there are shadows in overlapping subjects. Like if there are two berries or leaves together, the one below will have a shadow and more highlights on the top. This is a third layer, and I used a milk consistency of my green mix, and those are Hooker's Green Light, a small amount of ultramarine, and dioxazine purple. The leaves with shadows got darker on this layer. It means the shades of the leaves with shadows are more visible. In this stage, adding more saturated colors helps the subject to pop up more. Slowly, the painting is getting livelier. I left some areas of the leaves unpainted. I added only paint on some areas that needed more saturation and contrast. The holiday colors are getting more saturated at this stage. The colors green and red are complementary colors. It means those are the two colors that are opposite on the color wheel. Painting complementary colors is nice to the eye, so they can capture attention easily. In this stage, I focus on painting the leaves, and slowly the leaves are getting more realistic. As I add more saturated colors, the folds of the leaves become more visible. Adding saturated colors can help your subject look three-dimensional instead of looking flat on the paper. It's the secret and magic to paint three-dimensional on flat paper. Most beginners in watercolor painting are hesitant to add more paint than water to their color mixes. Most of the time, they mix from tea to coffee consistency only because we are always reminded to paint light to dark. I understand. It takes courage. Don't hesitate to add more contrast to your watercolor painting. Do you think the hollies are better than the previous stage? Try to get out of your comfort zone and try to add more contrast to your paintings. I also added saturated colors to the berries in a cream to water consistency. It means I have more paint than water in the previous stage. I would like the berries to pop up more. If you look closely, you'll see the colors of the berries got better when I added more colors to it. I also painted the stem with milk consistency of burnt sienna, but I will add more details later. I added water and mixed the green mixture I had on my palette with the cadmium red deep. They are complementary colors, so mixing them can make gray. I added more water to it for tea consistency. I want it to be light for the shadows of the snow, but not too dark. In painting white on white paper, you can do negative painting. It means you'll paint around the subject. For the snow, you can only paint the shadows. That's the reason I left the snow area untouched, since the first layer of painting the hollies and berries. You can observe the white objects around you or on different reference photos, and you'll see those white subjects or areas are not totally white. I painted the details on the hollies and the yellow parts of the hollies and stems with a cream to butter consistency. In the reference photo, you will see the edges of the hollies are yellow. I added more shadows and folds to the leaves as well. For the stem, instead of using burnt sienna, I mix colors to create a darker brown. I took a break, and of course, once the painting has dried, the colors are lighter than when you painted on them. So here I added more saturated colors on the hollies and berries. This part is optional. I find it more interesting to paint with the background and to help the snow to pop up more on the painting. In painting the background, I use tea consistency of ultramarine and dioxazine purple in wet on wet and section by section. I was also careful about painting on the sides of the snow, especially at the outline of the snow and the hollies, because the hollies have pointy edges. So if you will paint the background, you should be careful not to disturb the elements painted. I use a flat brush to wet the paper because it can cover bigger areas than the round brush I have. I use a smaller brush on the smaller areas in the middle of the hollies. I don't have any particular brush stroke here, but I always switch colors from ultramarine to dioxazine purple. This is the last part of the painting, and then I'll tell you my thoughts on using the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors. Also, I'll show you the final results of painting with background and without the background. Here I was finishing the background in the middle, and after the painting had dried, I took my leaf blade and inserted it into the small open area of the paper block and slowly glided the leaf blade around the paper. Here are my final thoughts on the Winsor Newton Cotman watercolors. Let's start with the pros. First, the color selection of the 10 colors is great and the colors are not overwhelming. It's a student-grade watercolor and gives an artist a feel because of its packaging, even the pen sets. The Cotman has sets of tubes and pens. It's up to you which one do you prefer. The colors can be easily lifted even if the painting has dried, but not sure if it will do the same if the painting has dried for a while. For the cons, here you can see I had a hard time mixing my green using the ultramarine and a lemon yellow hue. So I used Hooker's Green Light instead with a mix of ultramarine and the hyacinth purple. The same with the brown. I can't get a saturated color of the burnt sienna even if the color is wet in my pan. So I mix my own brown using ultramarine, cadmium orange hue, and the hyacinth purple. Here are the comparison videos of the Winsor Newton Cotman and Mungyo. Winsor Newton Cotman is not as vibrant as I expected it to be. It's a known classic brand, but even if I pre-wet the paints for a minute or so, I had a hard time picking up color. Well, it's student-grade paint, however, it's not as vibrant as the Mungyo, which is another student-grade paint, and it's easy to pick up color after pre-wetting the paints. Of course, compared to other professional brands like the Winsor Newton Professional and Daniel Smith, it's easy to get colors even if I just activated the paints in less than 10 seconds. Plus, the colors are more vibrant and the colors are easier to mix. Winsor and Newton Cotman colors are more hue, which means it's a mixture of different colors that are close to the original. According to Cheap Joe's website, in terms of paint colors, a hue simply indicates a color that is created by using different pigments instead of the original. Even though hue paint colors are made through mixing pigments, hue paints are still exceptional, close to the actual pure color. Here's the painting comparison without a background and with a background. Which one do you prefer? I hope you find this video helpful. Watch these next videos to see my reviews of other watercolor paints. Remember to subscribe for more videos like this.